The kitchen is already warm when she comes down the stairs in her stockinged feet, careful on the third step because it has creaked since the year they moved in, and she doesn't want to wake the children. The clock on the shelf above the sink reads 4:20. The gas range hums its small steady hum, the pilot light burning blue behind the chrome, and the coffee pot sits on the back burner where she left it last night, ready. She lights the front burner with a wooden match struck on the side of the box, and the ring of blue flame comes up the way it always does, even and obedient, and she sets the percolator over it and stands there for a moment with her hands flat on the counter, not thinking about anything in particular. The window over the sink is still dark. Outside, somewhere down the block, a milk truck is moving slowly through the cold, the bottles clinking faintly against each other in their wire crates. She is 31 years old. Her name does not matter for the story I want to tell you tonight, because she is one of millions of women who stood in kitchens like this one in the years between 1941 and 1949, doing what she's about to do with the radio waiting to be turned on, and the ration book in the drawer beside the silverware, and the letter on the counter that she has not yet opened. If you enjoy listening to sleep stories like this, subscribe. I post stories like this weekly. The percolator begins to mutter on the burner. She can smell the coffee already, that particular smell of grounds blooming in heat, and she thinks, as she thinks every morning, that there are some smells you do not get tired of, no matter how many times you stand over them. The kitchen smells of coffee and of last night's supper faintly, the way kitchens do when the dishes have been washed and put away but the air still remembers. It smells of the ivory soap she keeps in a small dish by the sink, the bar worn down to a curved pale shape that fits her palm. It smells of the cast iron skillet hanging on the hook by the range, seasoned with years of bacon grease and patience, and it smells, very faintly, of the canning jars stacked in the pantry just off the kitchen, glass and rubber rings and the green tomato relish she put up in September. She moves through the room without turning on the overhead light. She's done this so many mornings that she could do it blindfolded. The drawer where the spoons are, the cupboard where the cups hang on small brass hooks, the bread box at the end of the counter painted cream with a red stripe around the lid, the dish towel folded over the oven handle, white with a thin blue border, embroidered along one edge with her mother-in-law's small even stitches. Everything in this kitchen has a place, and the place is the place because she put it there, and because she has decided over 1,000 mornings that this is where it belongs. The coffee comes to a full boil. She lifts the percolator off the heat and pours a cup, and the steam rises against her face, and she stands at the window over the sink and looks out into the dark backyard, where the Victory Garden is sleeping under a thin frost. She can just make out the rows, beans along the back fence, tomatoes that are finished now, the vines pulled and composted, cabbages still in the ground, the heads tight and green, the little patch of carrots she will pull this weekend if the weather holds. Beyond the garden, the alley. Beyond the alley, the lights of someone else's kitchen, a square of warm yellow in another dark house. And she wonders for a moment who is awake over there, and what they are thinking about, and whether they too are standing at a sink with a cup of coffee in their hand. This is the hour she likes best. I want to be careful here, because I think we can romanticize this very easily, and the woman at this sink would not recognize a romantic version of her own morning. She is tired. She's been tired for almost 2 years now, a particular kind of tired that does not go away with sleep because the source of it is not work but waiting. Her husband is in the Pacific somewhere. The last letter came 11 days ago. The one on the counter, the one she has not yet opened, came yesterday afternoon, and she did not open it then because the children were home from school, and she wanted to be alone with whatever it said. And then last night she did not open it either, because by the time the children were in bed she was too tired to receive whatever news might be inside, and she decided, the way you decide these things when you're managing yourself like a small, careful country, that she would open it in the morning before they came down. The envelope is on the counter beside the bread box. It is thin. She can see the V-mail stamp on the corner, and the censor's mark, and her own name written in his careful upright handwriting, the way he always writes it, with the loop of the J slightly too large. She drinks her coffee and does not yet pick up the envelope. There is a particular grace in not yet doing a thing, and she knows it, and she allows herself this last small grace before the day begins in earnest. The radio sits on the counter near the icebox, a brown Bakelite Philco about the size of a loaf of bread. She does not turn it on yet. The morning broadcasts will not begin for another hour, and besides, she does not want the news yet. She wants the quiet. She wants to hear the coffee cooling in her cup and the percolator ticking as it lets go of its heat, and the small settling sounds the house makes when it is the only one awake. There is something I want to say about quiet in a 1940s kitchen, because it is not the same as quiet in a kitchen now. There is no refrigerator humming. The icebox is a real icebox, a wooden cabinet lined with metal, and the block of ice the Iceman delivered on Tuesday is still in the top compartment, melting into the drip pan she will empty later. There is no dishwasher to whir. There is no furnace to click on and off, although there is a coal furnace down in the basement that will need tending later, and she will tend it. There is no electric hum of 100 small appliances on standby. The kitchen is genuinely quiet, and the quiet has a texture to it, a kind of weight that you can lean into the way you lean into a wall. She pours a second cup of coffee. She still has not opened the letter. The kitchen itself is small by any measurement we would use today, 12 feet by 14 maybe, with the gas range against the inside wall, and the sink under the window, and the icebox in the corner, and the small enamelled table in the middle of the room, with 4 mismatched chairs around it. The floor is linoleum, a pattern of cream squares with small blue diamonds at the corners, worn smooth in the path between the range and the sink and the table, those 3 points she walks between 1,000 times a week. The walls are painted a pale yellow, the colour her mother-in-law called sunshine yellow when she helped them paint it the summer they moved in, the summer before the war, when painting a kitchen was a thing you did because you were starting a life and you had time for the choosing of colours. I find myself thinking about the kitchen as a place, the way some people think about a church as a place, a room where things happen that matter, a room organised around an altar, in this case the gas range, where the daily fire is kept and the daily food is made. In the old colonial farmhouses, the hearth was the centre of the home, the place where everything orbited. In 1943, the gas range is the new hearth. It is smaller than the old hearth, and far more efficient, and you do not have to chop wood for it, but the principle is the same. It is the source of the warmth that becomes the food that becomes the family. She lights the burner every morning, she turns it off at night, and in between, almost everything that happens in this house happens because she stood at this range and made it happen. She finishes the second cup of coffee. The window over the sink is beginning to show a thin grey at its edges. The dark is loosening its grip. Down the block the milk truck has moved on, and somewhere a car has started, and she can hear, faintly, the first train of the morning whistle out at the edge of town. The world is starting up. The day is coming whether she opens the letter or not. She picks up the envelope. She holds it for a moment between her fingers, feeling the thinness of it, the lightness of the paper. V-mail is photographed and reduced, then printed on small lightweight sheets that take up less space on the transport planes. A single letter weighs almost nothing. She has held heavier things. A cast-iron skillet weighs more than this. A pound of butter, when she could still get one, weighed more than this. And yet she has never held anything heavier in her life than the V-mail envelopes that come from the Pacific, because what is inside them is the whole rest of her life. She slides her thumb under the flap. The paper gives. She unfolds the small thin sheet and reads, standing at the counter in her stockinged feet, with the second empty coffee cup beside her, and the radio still silent, and the children still asleep upstairs. It is a letter. He is well. He cannot say where he is. The censor has blacked out one line near the bottom, but he is well, and he is thinking of her, and he is thinking of the children, and he wants her to know that he has been thinking about the way the kitchen looked on the morning he left, the way the light came in over the sink, the way she was standing at the range in her blue housecoat making him eggs. He remembers the eggs, he says. He remembers the kitchen. He says he will come home. He says it the way he always says it, plainly, without elaboration. He says he loves her. He signs his name the way he always signs it. She folds the letter. She puts it back in the envelope. She puts the envelope in the drawer where she keeps the others, the stack tied with a piece of brown string, more than 30 of them now, and she closes the drawer, and she stands at the counter with her hand on the drawer pull for a moment longer than she needs to. Then she begins the day. Now I want to ask you something, and I mean this genuinely. When was the last time you stood alone in a room before the rest of the world had woken up and let yourself be quiet inside it? Not waiting for something, not checking a phone, just standing there with a cup of something warm and the day not yet started. I find myself thinking about how rare that has become, how completely we have filled the early hours with light and sound, and the small pulling demands of devices that never quite let us be alone. The woman at the sink in 1943 did not have those demands. She had a quiet kitchen and a cup of coffee and her own thoughts. The thoughts were not easy. They were not peaceful in any simple way, but they were hers, undisturbed, for the half hour before the children came down. That half hour, I think, was one of the most genuine forms of solitude available to a woman in her time and place, and she protected it. Every morning she got up earlier than she had to so that she could have it. She goes to the pantry. The pantry is the small narrow room just off the kitchen, with shelves on both sides from floor to ceiling, and it is the room that tells you the most about the actual economic life of this household, if you know how to read it. On the top shelf, the canning jars, quart jars of tomatoes, the red of them dark and rich behind the glass, 18 of them lined up in 2 rows, pint jars of green beans, slimmer, paler, 24 of them, half pints of jam, strawberry from June, peach from August, blackberry from the bushes along the railroad cut where she took the children with 2 metal pails on a Saturday in July, quart jars of pickled cucumbers, of pickled beets, of corn relish, a shelf of jelly, a shelf of applesauce from the Macintoshes the orchard man brought around in his truck in September. On the lower shelves, the dry goods, a canister of flour, the white kind, almost empty now, a canister of cornmeal, fuller, a small jar of saccharin tablets for sweetening coffee when the sugar runs out, which it has, twice this month already, a tin of Crisco, the lid slightly dented from the last time she dropped it, a bottle of vanilla extract precious, used in drops rather than spoonfuls, a jar of bacon grease beside the range, kept for cooking eggs and for the scrap drive when it gets full enough. The ration book is in the drawer of the small writing desk just inside the pantry door. She takes it out. She does this every morning, not because she needs to, but because she likes to know where she stands, the way some people balance a checkbook every Sunday. The book is small, smaller than her hand, with a buff-coloured cover printed in dark red ink. War Ration Book 4, United States of America Office of Price Administration. Her name typed on the front, her address typed below it. Inside, the pages of stamps. The blue stamps for processed foods, in small denominations, 8 and 5 and 2 and 1. The red stamps for meat, fats and dairy, in the same denominations. Each stamp a tiny printed square with a number on it, and a letter that tells you which week or month it is valid in. You learn the letters the way you learn the days of the week. A and B and C and D, and then E and F and G and H, and so on through the alphabet. And the au pair announces in the newspaper which letters are good this week, and you adjust accordingly. She does the arithmetic in her head, the way she does every morning. The blue stamps for canned goods she has plenty because she put up so much herself this year. The red stamps for meat are tighter. She has enough for 2 more pounds this week, 3 if she is careful, and she will be careful. The sugar stamp is the worst because there is only 1 of them at a time, and it has to last for the entire month, and last week she used too much making the peach jam, and now she's paying for it in coffee taken bitter, and in the pies she has not made for 10 days. She thinks she will get a chocolate cake out of what is left if she's careful. She is always careful. The whole country is careful. And the careful is not resented mostly because the careful is what they are doing for the boys overseas. Every spoonful of sugar she does not use is, somewhere in the supply chain, a spoonful of sugar that ends up in a ration kit in a foxhole on Guadalcanal, or so the OPA pamphlets tell her, and she chooses to believe them, because the alternative is not believing them, and the alternative is unbearable. I want to be careful here not to make this into something it was not. Rationing was not a game, and it was not a noble adventure, and the women who managed it did not experience it as character building or as a wartime hobby. It was a constraint. It made everything harder. It made the planning of meals into a small daily mathematics problem that you could not get wrong, because getting it wrong meant the family did not eat the way the family should eat, and there was no margin for failure. But within the constraint, something interesting happened, something I find myself thinking about more and more. The constraint made them inventive. The constraint made them careful. The constraint made them notice what they had in a way that abundance does not make you notice. There is something about constraint that sharpens appreciation. It is a lesson I think about sometimes when I'm standing in front of a refrigerator with 100 options and somehow cannot decide what I want to eat. The woman in the pantry in 1943 is not deciding what she wants. She's deciding what is possible. And the deciding is not lesser for being constrained. It might in some ways be greater. She closes the ration book. She puts it back in the drawer. She goes back to the kitchen. The light at the window has changed. It is grey now, not dark. The kind of grey that means the sun is just below the horizon and will be up within the next 20 minutes. She can see the outlines of the garden more clearly. She can see the row of jars on the kitchen windowsill, the small ones she keeps there to catch the morning light, 3 of them filled with various things she's using up. Bacon grease in one, a few tablespoons of leftover gravy from last night that she'll put into soup at noon, a handful of stale bread heels she is saving for breadcrumbs to stretch the meatloaf on Friday. Nothing is thrown away in this kitchen. Nothing has been thrown away in this kitchen in 2 years. Waste is not an option. There is no garbage can in the modern sense because there is so little garbage. Vegetable peels go to the compost pile in the corner of the garden. Bones go into the stock pot. Fat goes into the can by the range, and from there eventually to the butcher, who collects it for the scrap drive, because rendered fat makes glycerin, and glycerin makes explosives, and explosives go to the war. I want to say that again, because I think it is one of the details that stops people cold when they first hear it. The bacon grease in the can by the kitchen range was, in 1943, considered a strategic material. Housewives across the country were asked to save it and turn it in, and many of them did, and the fat they turned in was processed into glycerin, and the glycerin was used in the manufacture of munitions. The kitchen and the war were not separate. The kitchen was a small wing of the war. The cast-iron skillet on the hook was a piece of equipment in a national supply chain. The decision not to waste was not just thrift. It was a kind of civic act, performed 100 times a day by tens of millions of women in tens of millions of kitchens, and the cumulative effect of all those small decisions was, by the end of the war, genuinely measurable. She lights the second burner. She takes the cast-iron skillet down from the hook. She opens the icebox, careful not to let the cold out for longer than she needs to, and takes out 4 eggs from the small bowl on the top shelf. The hens at the back of the lot have been laying well this fall, better than last year, and 4 eggs is a luxury she would not have managed in March when they were not laying at all. She breaks the eggs into a bowl. She adds a splash of milk from the bottle the iceman left on Tuesday, only about an inch of it left in the bottom. She whisks the eggs with a fork, the same fork her mother gave her when she got married, the tines slightly bent from years of use. She melts a small spoonful of bacon grease in the skillet and pours the eggs in and stands over them with a wooden spoon, moving them slowly the way her mother taught her, low and slow, so that the eggs come out tender instead of rubbery. The smell of eggs cooking in bacon fat fills the kitchen. It is one of the great smells, I think. It belongs to the morning in a way that few other smells do. The children will be down in a few minutes. They will smell it before they see it. They will come into the kitchen rubbing their eyes, the older one first, the boy, 8 years old, with his hair sticking up in the back the way it always does. Then the girl, 6, in her flannel nightgown, dragging her stuffed rabbit by one ear. They will sit at the table. They will eat the eggs and the toast she will make from yesterday's bread, and the small glass of orange juice she will pour each of them from the can of frozen concentrate she mixed last night. But before they come down, she has a few more minutes alone, and she uses them. She stands at the range and she watches the eggs cook, and she lets her mind go where it wants to go, which is to him, of course, somewhere in the Pacific, somewhere she cannot picture properly because she has never been anywhere like it. She tries to picture it sometimes, the heat, the green, the ocean. The pictures she gets are always wrong, she suspects. They look like the postcards in the drugstore, the kind that say, "Greetings from Hawaii, palm trees and beaches." She knows he's not on a beach. She knows he's somewhere harder than that. But she lets herself picture the palm trees anyway, because picturing the harder thing is too much for the morning, and the morning is for the eggs and the children and the small organised list of things she will do today, and the harder thing can wait for later, the way the letter waited in the drawer. The eggs are done. She slides them onto a plate. She sets the plate on the warmer shelf above the range, a small ledge with a screen back designed exactly for this. She turns the burner down to its lowest setting and puts the kettle on for tea, because she will want a cup with the children, and because the day, properly, begins with everyone at the table together. The radio low in the background tuned to the morning news, The small clatter of forks and the small careful voice of the 8-year-old reading the funnies aloud to his sister, and the sweet milky smell of children just out of bed. The kettle starts to whistle. She lifts it off the burner. She pours the water into the brown ceramic teapot her grandmother gave her in 1937, the one with the small chip on the spout that she has been meaning to replace for 6 years, and that she will never replace, because some things you do not replace, even when they are chipped, because the chip is part of the thing now, and the thing is part of you. She hears the floorboard creak upstairs. The older one is up. In a moment the smaller one will follow. The day is starting. She turns on the radio. She turns it low. She finds the station she wants, WJZ out of New York, and the morning announcer is reading the weather, and after the weather there will be news from the front, and she will listen to it the way she listens to it every morning, with a particular attention that is not exactly fear, and not exactly hope, but something in between. And she will not flinch when the place names come, because flinching is a thing she has trained herself out of for the children. The boy comes down the stairs first. He stops on the bottom step and looks at her and says, "Good morning, Mum," the way he says it every morning, slightly formal, the way his father said it when he was a boy, his mother told her once. She says good morning back. She holds out her arms. He comes to her, 8 years old and almost too big for this, and not quite, and she folds him against her for a second, just a second, and then she sends him to the table. This is how the day begins, in a yellow kitchen in 1943, with a gas range and a cup of coffee and a letter folded back into a drawer, with a small boy and his sleepy good morning and the radio playing low, with eggs on a plate and a teapot pouring and a window beginning to show the first real light of the day, with a woman who has been awake since 4:20 and who will not stop moving until 9 at night, and who would not have it any other way, because the moving is what she has, and the moving is what keeps the rest of it bearable, and the moving is, in its own quiet way, what she is doing for him. The day will be long. The day will be full of small careful decisions and small careful tasks and the steady deliberate weight of running a household in a country at war. We are going to walk through it together, slowly, the way these days actually unfolded, one room and one task and 1 hour at a time, and I think, by the end of it, you will understand something about these women that the history books do not quite capture, because the history books are always looking at the big things, the factory work, the Rosie the Riveter posters, the women who built the airplanes. Those women existed and they were extraordinary, but there were other women, more of them by far, who did not build airplanes, who built something quieter and harder to measure, which was the running of an ordinary household under extraordinary pressure, day after day after day, for as long as the pressure lasted. That is the story I want to tell you tonight. The boy is at the table now. The girl is coming down the stairs, slowly, one step at a time, dragging the rabbit. The radio is murmuring about the weather. The eggs are on the warmer shelf. The light at the window is coming up pale and cold, and the day, the long day, the ordinary impossible day, is beginning. There is a particular geography to a 1940s house, and I want to walk you through it now, slowly, because the geography matters in ways that are not obvious until you live inside it, or until you imagine living inside it long enough to feel the way the rooms shape the days. The house is a 2-story frame house on a quiet street in a small Midwestern town. It was built in 1921, the same year her husband was born, which is a coincidence that she has thought about more than once, the house and the man arriving in the world the same year, and meeting each other when she met him, and beginning their life together inside the older one. The clapboard siding is painted white, the trim around the windows green, the front door dark red. There is a porch across the front of the house, deep enough for 2 wicker chairs and a small table, and a swing on chains at one end. And in summer she sits out there in the evenings shelling peas or snapping beans, and the neighbours walk by on the sidewalk and stop and talk. And the talk is the closest thing to a newspaper that the block has. You come in through the front door into a small entry, with the staircase rising up on the left and a coat closet under the stairs, and a small table where the mail sits when it comes. The parlour is to the right, the room she calls the parlour, because her mother called it the parlour, although the magazines have started calling it the living room, and she supposes she will switch eventually, the way you switch words when the world switches them. The parlour has a sofa upholstered in a green and brown floral that was new when they bought it in 1938, and 2 armchairs flanking the fireplace, and a console radio in the corner, the big one, the floor model Philco with the curved top and the cloth-covered speaker grille. The console radio is the centrepiece of the parlour, in a way that no piece of furniture in a modern living room is the centerpiece of anything. It is where the family gathers at 6:30 for the news, and at 7 for the comedy programs, and on Sunday afternoons for the symphony broadcasts. The chairs in the parlour are arranged in a half circle facing the radio, the way chairs in a later decade would be arranged facing a television, the way chairs in an earlier decade had been arranged facing a fireplace. The centre of attention moves, but the principle holds. There is always a centre, and the chairs face it. The fireplace in the parlour does not work anymore, or rather, it works, but they do not use it. The house has a coal furnace in the basement that heats the radiators, and the fireplace was bricked part way up when the furnace was put in, and now it is mostly decorative with a brass screen across it and a row of family photographs on the mantel above. The photographs include her wedding picture, 1935, her in a long white dress and him in his Sunday suit, looking serious in the way young men used to look serious in wedding pictures. There is a picture of the children, taken in the studio downtown 2 summers ago, the boy in a sailor suit and the girl in a smocked dress. There is a picture of her parents on their porch in Iowa. There is a small picture, in a silver frame, of him in his Navy uniform taken the week before he shipped out. She does not look at that picture too long most days. She has decided, the way she decides things, that she will look at it carefully on Sundays after church, and on his birthday, and on their anniversary, and the rest of the time she will let it sit on the mantel without quite looking at it, because looking at it too much is not useful and not bearable. Behind the parlour is the dining room, with a heavy oak table that seats 6, expandable to 8 with the leaves she keeps in the closet. The dining room is used for Sundays and for company, and otherwise the family eats in the kitchen at the smaller table. The dining room has a built-in china cabinet against one wall, and inside it the good dishes, the ones her grandmother gave her, white with a thin gold border and small pink roses, and the silverware in its felt-lined box, and the cut-glass bowl that was a wedding present from his aunt. There is something about a dining room in a 1940s house that I find quietly moving. It is a room dedicated to a particular kind of ceremony, the family meal treated with the seriousness it deserves. You do not eat in the dining room every night. You eat in the dining room when it matters, and the room sits there, most days, slightly hushed, waiting for the next time it matters. Behind the dining room is the kitchen, which we have already been in, and behind the kitchen is the back porch, a small enclosed room with a washtub and a wringer washer and shelves for the things that do not quite belong in the kitchen, but need to be near it. The washing machine is a Maytag, electric, the kind with a tub on top and a wringer attachment on the side. She does not love it. She has used worse, the scrub board her mother used, and she has used better. In the magazines you can see pictures of the new automatic machines that some women have, machines that do not require you to feed the wet sheets through the wringer one at a time. She does not have one of those. She has the Maytag, and the Maytag has worked since 1939, and she will use it until it does not work anymore, and then she will figure out what to do, and the figuring out will be one of the small problems she will solve, because solving small problems is what she does. Upstairs there are 3 bedrooms and a single bathroom. The master bedroom at the front of the house, with the bed she shares with him when he is home, and that she sleeps in alone when he is not. The bed feeling enormous now, a great expanse of cool sheets that she warms slowly across the course of a night. The boys' room at the back of the house, small, with a single bed and a desk and a window that looks out over the alley. The girls' room across the hall, even smaller, with a single bed and a dresser and a small rocking chair that was her own when she was a child in Iowa. The bathroom between them, with a clawfoot tub and a pedestal sink and a toilet with a wooden seat, and a small medicine cabinet above the sink containing a bottle of mercurochrome and a bottle of cod liver oil, and a tin of bag balm and a glass jar of cotton balls and his shaving things, untouched since he left, kept exactly the way he left them, the brush dried hard and the razor folded into its case. The basement is where the coal furnace lives, and the laundry tubs, and the shelves where the canning overflow goes when the pantry is full, and a small workshop area at the back where his tools hang on a pegboard that he built himself the winter before he left. She has not touched the tools. She does not know how to use most of them. The pegboard sits in the basement exactly the way it sat the day he hung up his hammer, for the last time before going to the recruiting office, and she goes down there sometimes when she needs something from the cold storage, and she stands for a moment in front of the pegboard and looks at the tools and thinks about him, and then she goes back upstairs and the day continues. The attic is where the things she does not need every day are kept. The Christmas decorations and the trunk with the baby clothes she could not bear to give away, and the photographs in their albums and the box of letters her mother wrote her when she first moved away from home, and the wedding dress in a sealed box, and 100 other small artifacts of a life that has been accumulating for 31 years and that she is still in the middle of. This is the house. It is small by some measurements and big by others. It is bigger than her grandmother's farmhouse in Iowa, which had 2 rooms and a sleeping loft and an outhouse. It is smaller than the houses some of her friends have, the ones whose husbands did better in the years before the war, the ones with the brick fronts and the sunrooms and the powder rooms off the front entry. It is, by any reasonable measure, an ordinary middle-class American house of its era, and the woman inside it is an ordinary middle-class American woman of her era. And the ordinariness is, I want to say plainly, not a smaller thing for being ordinary. The ordinariness is the whole point. Because what these women were doing inside houses exactly like this one, multiplied by tens of millions, is what made the home front actually function. Not the headlines, not the speeches, the ordinariness, performed faithfully, day after day, in tens of millions of yellow kitchens and dim parlours and small bathrooms with clawfoot tubs. I think about this sometimes when I read the histories of the war, which tend to focus on the dramatic, the battles, the policies, the great men in great rooms making great decisions. Those stories are real and worth telling. But there is another story, quieter, made of millions of small repetitions of the same humble acts, and that story is also real, and I am not sure we tell it often enough, and I want to try to tell some of it tonight. She finishes the eggs with the children. The girl eats slowly, the boy eats fast, and both of them are mostly done by 7. The radio has moved from weather to news, and the news is about a place in the Solomons whose name she cannot pronounce, and she listens to it with the part of her mind that is always listening to the news now, scanning the place names for the one place name that matters, and not hearing it this morning, and feeling the small, ordinary relief of not hearing it, and going on with her morning. She sends the children upstairs to dress. They will leave for school at 7:45. The boy walks the girl to the elementary school 4 blocks away, and from there he walks another 6 blocks to the boys' school, and the arrangement has been working since September, and she trusts him with it the way she trusts him with small important things, because he is 8, and he is careful, and he has, since his father left, become a slightly older boy than he should be, and she has watched it happen with a mixture of pride and quiet sorrow that she does not know what to do with. She clears the table, she washes the dishes in the sink, the water as hot as she can stand it, with a small grating of ivory soap dissolved in it, and she rinses them in the dishpan beside the sink, and she sets them in the wooden rack to dry. She does not have an electric dishwasher. Very few houses do in 1943, although the magazines show them, and she has looked at them sometimes with a kind of curiosity that is not quite longing. She does not mind washing dishes. The washing of dishes is a small contained task, with a beginning and a middle and an end, and the end leaves the kitchen better than the beginning found it, and there is a satisfaction in that kind of work which is its own quiet reward. While she washes, she listens to the radio. The news has ended. The morning programme has started, a half-hour of music and chat hosted by a man named Don, who has a warm, slow voice and reads the news between songs, and she does not really listen to him, but she likes the sound of him in the kitchen, the way you like the sound of a kettle. The songs are the songs of the year, the Andrews sisters singing about Boogie Woogie, Bing Crosby singing something slow and warm. Glenn Miller, who is in the army now leading the Air Force Band, his sound still on the radio every day. She has danced to all of these songs. She has danced to most of them with him. She does not dance now, or rather, she dances in the kitchen sometimes when no one is watching, small steps with a dish towel in her hand, the way you dance when you have not danced with anyone in a long time, and you're trying to remember what it felt like. The children come down dressed for school, the boy in his sweater and his corduroys, the girl in her plaid jumper and her white blouse, both of them carrying their lunch pails, which she packed last night before bed, sandwiches wrapped in waxed paper and apples and small thermoses of milk. She checks them at the door, she straightens the girl's collar, she tells the boy to button his coat, she kisses each of them on the top of the head, and she opens the door, and she watches them walk down the front walk to the sidewalk and turn left toward the school, and they walk together holding hands, the boy slightly ahead, the girl trailing slightly behind, and she watches them until they are around the corner, and then she closes the door and the house is quiet. This is the second quiet of the day. The first one was before they came down. This one is after they leave. It will last until 3:30 when they come home, with a break at noon when the boy will walk home for lunch but the girl stays at school. 6.5 hours of quiet in which she will do almost everything that needs to be done in a household of 4 people. The cooking, the cleaning, the laundry, the mending, the marketing, the canning, the gardening, the bill paying, the letter writing, the careful management of every small resource. 6.5 hours every weekday for the duration of the war and after. She goes back to the kitchen. She pours the 3rd cup of coffee, the last one she'll have today because there is only so much coffee and she has to make it last. She sits at the kitchen table and she pulls toward her the small notebook she keeps there, a 5-cent composition book with a black and white marbled cover, and she opens it to the page where she keeps her list for today, and she reads through the list, and she begins. The list is long. The list is always long. Monday is washing day, Tuesday is ironing, Wednesday is mending, Thursday is the heavy cleaning, Friday is baking and marketing, Saturday is the garden and the canning if there is canning to be done. Sunday is church and the family dinner and a slower pace, though slower is relative, because slower in a 1940s household still involves more work than most of us would consider a full day. This week, today, is Wednesday, which means mending. But there is also the marketing, which she'll do at 10 because Friday is going to be busy and she wants to get ahead. And there is a letter she needs to write to his mother in Indiana, who is not well and who waits for letters the way she waits for letters, and so she will write one this morning by hand, 3 pages, careful and warm, and she will walk it to the post office on her way to the grocery. I want to stop here and acknowledge something because I think it matters. The list of things she does in a day, if you wrote it out completely, would be longer than most modern people would believe, and every single thing on the list is something she does with her hands. There is no convenience that does the work for her. There is no service that comes in and takes the work off her plate. There is no app that organizes it. There is only her and the list and the doing of the list, one thing at a time in a particular order that she has worked out over years of trial and error, an order that she now executes the way a skilled worker executes a craft, with small efficiencies and small kindnesses to her future self built in. The marketing before lunch because the lines are shorter, the mending in the afternoon because the light is better, the letter to his mother first thing because she is freshest then, and the letter will be warmer. There is a kind of intelligence at work here that does not get measured. It does not show up on intelligence tests. It does not appear on resumes. It is not the kind of intelligence that the economy of 1943 recognized or paid for. But it is real, and it is considerable, and it is the kind of intelligence that, multiplied by tens of millions of women applying it to the running of tens of millions of households, made the home front work. She finishes her coffee, she rinses the cup. She turns off the radio because she has things to do that require a quiet mind. And the radio, for all its company, can become a distraction. She goes to the small desk in the corner of the dining room, where she keeps her stationery and her pens and her stamps and the address book her mother gave her when she got married. She sits down, she takes a sheet of cream-coloured paper from the box, and she uncaps the fountain pen, and she begins the letter to his mother. She writes that the children are well. She writes that the boy did well on his spelling test last week. She writes that the girl has lost her first tooth, and she does a small sketch in the margin of the place where the tooth used to be, because his mother loves that kind of thing. She writes that she had a letter yesterday, that he is well, that he sends his love, that she will visit at Christmas if the trains are running on time. She writes about the garden, about the cabbages still in the ground, about the way the Macintoshes came in well this year. She does not write about the harder things. She does not write about how tired she is, or about the way the bed feels at night, or about the small particular grief of standing in the parlour sometimes and looking at his picture on the mantel and feeling for a moment that she has forgotten the sound of his voice. Those things are not for the letter. The letter is for the small warm things, the things his mother can hold on to, the things that will not make a sick woman in Indiana feel worse than she already feels. She signs the letter. She blots it. She folds it into thirds and slides it into the envelope and writes the address in her careful hand, and presses a 3-cent stamp into the corner, the purple one with Jefferson on it, and she sets the envelope on the small table by the front door so she will not forget to take it with her when she goes out. It is 8:30. The house is very quiet. The light at the windows is full now. the cold pale light of a November morning, and outside the trees on the street are mostly bare, the last of the leaves blown down 2 weeks ago, and the world has that stripped down quality that the end of autumn has, when the year is winding toward its rest and everything is becoming spare and clear. She stands at the dining room window for a moment. She does not have to be doing anything for a moment, although she is always doing something, and the moment of not having to do something is rare and worth pausing for. She watches a sparrow on the bare branch of the elm across the street. She watches a black sedan move slowly past the house, the milkman in his white uniform riding in the back, the truck stopping 3 doors down to deliver. She watches the world go on with its ordinary business, and she thinks for a moment about how strange it is that the world goes on with its ordinary business while there is a war on, that the sparrows do not know, that the elm tree does not know, that the milk gets delivered and the mail gets sorted and the children go to school and the wives stand at their windows and the husbands, some of them, are in places where the sparrows are different and the trees are different and the milk does not come. And then she shakes the thought off because the thought does not help and she has work to do. She goes upstairs, she makes the beds. The children's first, the small task of straightening sheets and plumping pillows and pulling up the chenille bedspreads, the boys blue and the girls pink. Then her own room, the master bed, made for 2, made for 1. She smooths the sheets, she fluffs the pillows, she pulls up the quilt her mother made for them when they got married, the wedding ring pattern in blues and yellows. She stands beside the bed for a moment when she is done. She does not let herself sit down on it. Sitting down on a made bed is a small surrender, and she does not surrender, not at 8:30 in the morning, not when there is so much still to do. She picks up the mending basket from the chair by the window. She carries it downstairs to the kitchen, because the light there is best, and because the kitchen is the room she lives in more than any other, and the mending will go faster there. She sets the basket on the table. She lifts the lid. Inside, the small accumulation of the week's worth of things that have come apart and need to be put back together. A pair of the boys' pants with a hole in the knee, one of the girls' socks with the heel worn through, a pillowcase with a torn seam, a pair of her own stockings, the lisle kind, with a run that can be saved if she catches it in time. The good silk stockings she had before the war are gone now, given over to the war effort along with the silk from old neckties and old scarves, all of it going to make parachutes, also the OPA said. She wears lisle now when she can get them, and she paints her legs sometimes for special occasions with a tea solution to give them a stocking colour, and she draws a line up the back of each leg with an eyebrow pencil to mimic the seam. The first time she did it, she felt foolish. The 5th time she did it, she felt resourceful. The 15th time she did it, she did not feel anything in particular, because it was just what you did. She threads a needle. The needle is fine, and her eyes are still good, but the light is what matters, and she angles her chair so that the light from the window over the sink falls directly on the basket. She picks up the boys' pants. She turns them inside out. She finds the small fragment of cloth she has set aside for patches, cut from an old pair of his that had finally worn beyond saving, and she cuts a square slightly larger than the hole, and she pins it in place from the inside, and she begins to sew. The sewing is slow, careful, repetitive. It is the kind of work that lets the mind go where it wants to go, and her mind goes, as it always does when she is sewing, to the small, ordinary things she does not have time to think about during the busier parts of the day. She thinks about the chocolate cake she's planning for Sunday, and whether she can stretch the sugar far enough, and whether the eggs the hens are laying will hold up. She thinks about the boy's birthday in January, and what she might make him, since the toys in the stores this year are mostly cardboard and tin, the good materials having gone to the war, and what kind of birthday a boy can have when the toys are mostly cardboard. She thinks about Christmas. She thinks about how she'll get a tree this year, and whether the boy is old enough to help her cut one from the lot, and what she'll put on it, since the good ornaments are getting fragile and she does not want to break any of them. She thinks about his mother in Indiana, who may not last the winter. She thinks about her own mother in Iowa, who's still strong, who writes once a week, whose letters are full of news about the farm and the war ration board she sits on, and the canning she has done. She thinks about the women on her block, the 4 of them she has come to know best, who will gather Wednesday afternoons at one or another of their houses to drink weak tea and roll bandages for the Red Cross. Today the gathering is at Mrs. Henderson's house 2 doors down, and she will go there at 1:30 after lunch, and she will bring with her the small bag of rolled bandages she has finished this week, and they will sit in Mrs. Henderson's parlour and roll more bandages, and they will talk, and the talking will be the thing, more than the bandages, because the talking is how they hold each other up. I want to tell you about those Wednesday afternoons, because they are one of the things about this period that I find most moving when I read about them honestly, and I want to do them justice. But first I want to tell you about the marketing, because the marketing comes first in the day, and the marketing tells you a great deal about how the constraint actually worked, hour by hour, in a particular small town in a particular American autumn in the third year of the war. She finishes the patch on the boys' pants, she sets them aside neatly folded, and she picks up the girl's sock. The mending will keep until later. She puts the basket back on the table with its lid open, as a kind of bookmark, a promise to return to it after lunch. She puts on her good wool coat, the green one she's had since 1939, the elbows starting to wear thin, the lining repaired twice. She puts on her hat, a small brown felt with a feather, the same hat she has worn for 3 winters. She picks up her purse, and inside her purse, the ration book and the small leather change purse, with $3.50 in it, which is what she has budgeted for this week's marketing, and the list she has made the night before of what she needs, and the smaller list of what she might find if she is lucky, and the smaller list still of what she will substitute if she cannot find any of it. She picks up the letter to his mother. She steps out the front door. She closes it behind her, and she pulls the key from her coat pocket and locks the door, although the locking is mostly habit, because no one on this street locks their doors really, except at night, and even then, sometimes not. She walks down the front steps. She turns left on the sidewalk and starts toward town. The walk to the grocery is 6 blocks. She has walked it so many times that her feet know it without her thinking. Past the Hendersons' house with the small flag in the window, a single blue star for their son in the Army Air Corps. Past the Mitchells' house with the flag with 2 blue stars, both their boys in the Navy. Past the Petersons' house, the corner house, with the flag with 1 gold star. I want to stop here, and I want to be careful about how I say this next part, because the gold star is one of the things about this period that I think about the most, and I do not want to do it the wrong kind of justice. A blue star in the window meant a son or husband in the service. A gold star meant the same person, dead. The flags were not government issued exactly. They were made by mothers' organisations and sold for a few cents each, and you put yours up when your boy went, and if the news came, you took down the blue star and you replaced it with a gold one. The gold star was the visible mark of grief on a house, and on a street like this one, with 4 flags and one of them gold, the gold flag was the first thing your eye went to when you turned the corner. You did not look at it directly, you looked past it, you let yourself see it without seeing it, because the family inside had asked, in their quiet, careful way, by putting up the flag, that the neighbourhood acknowledge what had happened, and the acknowledgement was in the seeing, but the privacy of the grief was in the not looking too long. She passes the Petersons' house every morning. She has passed it every morning since June, when the gold star went up. The Petersons' boy was 19. He was the older brother of the girl who walks to school with her own girl, and the 2 girls are friends, and the friendship has continued, careful and tender, with the small awareness on both sides that something has changed in the older girl's house, that there is now a particular kind of quiet there that the younger girl has been gently taught not to ask about. Mrs. Peterson comes to the Wednesday afternoon bandage rolling. She's come every Wednesday since the funeral. She rolls bandages with her hands steady and her face composed, and she talks about the weather and the canning and the children, and the other women on the block have decided, without ever saying so out loud, that the way to love her right now is to let her be exactly the version of herself she has chosen to be in the parlour on Wednesday afternoons, and not to push. This is one of the things I think we lose when we tell the story of the home front in big strokes, the way grief was managed in the small social ecology of a single street, the way women learned, by watching each other, what to ask about and what to leave alone, the way the gold star said something the family could not say out loud, and the way the rest of the block heard it without making the family say it again. There was an emotional intelligence in this, a kind of communal grace, that I think we have lost some of in our era of more direct communication, where we are encouraged to ask and to share and to process. I am not arguing that the older way was better. I am just saying that the older way was a way, and it had its own dignity, and the women on this street understood it the way you understand a language you've grown up inside without needing to think about it. She walks past the Petersons' house. She does not look at the gold star. She nods at Mrs. Peterson, who is on her porch shaking out a rug, and Mrs. Peterson nods back, and the nod is everything, and the nod is enough. She continues toward town. The grocery is on Main Street in a row of small shops that include the drugstore, and the five and dime and the dry goods store and the post office and the bank. She stops at the post office first, climbs the 3 concrete steps, pushes through the heavy glass door and joins the small line at the counter. There are 4 people ahead of her, 2 women, an older man, and a boy of about 14 who is sending what looks like a package to someone overseas, the brown paper wrapping carefully tied with string. She waits her turn. The post office smells of paper and ink and the particular cold mineral smell of the marble floor. The clerk behind the counter is a woman in her 50s, with grey hair pulled back in a knot, who has worked at this post office since before the war. She knows everyone in town by name. She knows which families are waiting on letters. She does not say so, but she handles the V-mail with a particular gentleness, and she gives a small extra moment of attention to the women who come to her window with the careful, tight faces of those expecting news. When her turn comes, she slides the letter to his mother across the counter. The clerk weighs it on the small brass scale, although she knows perfectly well it does not need weighing. The clerk smiles and says, 3 cents, dear. She pays with 3 pennies from her change purse. The clerk drops the letter into the canvas mailbag behind her. The clerk says, you take care now. She says, you too. The exchange is small. The exchange is the whole point. She walks down Main Street toward the grocery. The street is busy for a Wednesday morning. Women in coats with shopping baskets over their arms, men in the blue uniforms of the railroad or the brown uniforms of the postal service, or the rough wool jackets of the farmers in from the country for supplies. 2 soldiers in olive drab, on leave from the base over in the next county, walking along the sidewalk with their caps tucked under their arms. She nods at them as they pass. They nod back. One of them is very young, 18 maybe, and his face has the smooth, scrubbed quality of a boy who has not yet been overseas, and she thinks for a second that someone's mother is praying for him every night, and then she lets the thought go because it is too close to the thought. She does not let herself think about her own husband, and she walks on. The grocery is called Kruger's. It has been on this corner since 1910. Mr. Kruger Sr. ran it until he died in 1937, and now Mr. Kruger Jr. runs it, although Mr. Kruger Jr. is 64 and slowing down, and his daughter has been helping more. The store is small, 2 narrow aisles, a meat counter at the back, a produce section by the front window, shelves of canned goods along both walls, and behind the front counter, the cigarettes and the coffee and the small luxuries when there are any. She steps inside. The bell over the door chimes. Mr. Kruger looks up from the meat counter where he's wrapping a package for another customer, and he nods at her and says, "Good morning," and she says, "Good morning" back. She takes a basket from the stack by the door and starts down the first aisle. The shopping itself is a kind of small puzzle, and I want to walk you through it slowly because the puzzle is the thing that I think people today do not quite imagine when they imagine wartime grocery shopping. You do not just put things in your basket. You manage points. Every processed food, canned vegetables, canned fruit, canned juices, has a point value in blue stamps, and you have a fixed number of blue points for the month, and you cannot exceed them. Meat, butter, cheese, fats have a point value in red stamps, and the red stamps are tighter, and the red stamps are the ones that make the cooking harder. Sugar has its own stamp, 1 per month per person, and woe to the woman who uses hers up in the first 2 weeks. She moves through the store with her list in one hand and her ration book in the other, and she does the arithmetic in her head. A can of tomatoes is 8 blue points, a can of peas is 6, a can of peaches is 14, and she would love a can of peaches, but the points are too dear, and she has put up her own peaches anyway, so she passes. A pound of butter is 16 red points. A pound of margarine is half that. She buys the margarine. The margarine in 1943 comes white in the package, with a small capsule of yellow food colouring that you mix in yourself, because the dairy lobby fought hard against margarine being sold pre-yellow, fearing it would be mistaken for butter, and so the housewives of America mix in the colouring themselves, kneading it into the white block until it turns a pale buttery yellow, and the kneading is one more small task in a day full of small tasks. She buys what she needs and not more: a bag of flour, a small package of brown sugar, a pound of margarine, a pound of bacon, the last one Mr. Kruger has, which he has set aside for her because she comes in on Wednesdays and he knows what she takes. A can of tuna, because the boy likes tuna salad sandwiches and they have not had them in 2 weeks. A bunch of carrots from the produce, although she has her own carrots in the garden, but the ones in her garden are still small and she will let them grow another 2 weeks. A small bottle of vanilla, because the one in the pantry is almost empty. A box of saltines. At the counter, Mr. Kruger tallies her purchases. He tears the appropriate stamps from her ration book with the small, slow care of a man who's been doing this for 3 years and who does not want to make a mistake, because making a mistake with a ration book is a serious thing. He hands the book back to her. He hands her the change. He says, "Take care of yourself," and his voice is warm in the way of a man who has known her since she was a young bride coming in for her first groceries, and she says, "You too, Mr. Kruger," and she means it, because Mr. Kruger has been good to her family throughout the war, and because Mr. Kruger has his own gold star, his only son, killed at Pearl Harbor 2 years ago next month. She walks home with the basket on her arm. The basket is not heavy. There is not enough in it to make it heavy. But it is, in its own way, a full week of meals, planned and arranged and made possible by the small, careful decisions she has made in the Isles of Krugers, and as she walks home she's already planning in the back of her mind what she will make tonight and tomorrow and the next day, the way the bacon will stretch across 2 breakfasts and 1 supper if she crumbles it into the macaroni, the way the tuna will become a salad on Friday with the last of the celery from the garden and a hard-boiled egg, the way the margarine will go on the bread but only on the bread, because she will use bacon fat for the cooking to make the margarine last. The walking home, in the cold pale sunshine of a November morning, with the basket on her arm and the planning happening in the back of her mind, is one of the small pleasures of her week, although she would not call it a pleasure if you asked her. She would call it the marketing. She would say it was just the marketing. But there is something in the rhythm of it. The walk down and the walk back, the puzzle of the point solved another week, the small competence of having done it well, that is genuinely satisfying, and the satisfaction sits somewhere in her chest as she comes back up the front walk to her house, and lets herself in, and sets the basket on the kitchen table, and takes off her coat, and puts on her apron and begins to unpack. It is 10:30. The morning is half gone. The day is moving. She has not stopped, and she will not stop, until very late tonight, when the dishes are done and the children are in bed and the radio is off, and she sits for a moment in the dim parlour with a cup of weak tea, and she lets herself for the first time all day not be doing anything at all, and she will sit there, and she will think about him, and she will not cry, because she does not cry much anymore, and then she will go up to bed, and she will warm the cold sheets with the slow heat of her own body, and she will sleep, and the day will start again tomorrow at 4:20, and the day after, and the day after, for as long as the war lasts and after. The garden is sleeping under its November frost, but the canning shelf is not sleeping. The canning shelf is awake all winter. The canning shelf is, in some sense, what the garden becomes when the garden goes to bed, and I want to take you out to look at it, because it is one of the things about this kind of household that I find genuinely moving, in a way that surprises me every time I think about it carefully. After she unpacks the groceries, she goes down to the basement. The basement stairs are wooden, painted grey, and they creak slightly at the 4th step. She pulls the chain on the bare bulb at the bottom of the stairs, and the cellar lights up dim and yellow, and the cellar smells of cold concrete and coal dust, and the particular vegetable smell of root crops in storage. The canning shelves are along the back wall, 3 shelves running the full width of the basement, and on them, in rows, the work of the spring and summer and fall. I want to count them with you slowly, because the counting is part of what makes the shelves what they are. Tomatoes, 24-quart jars, the red of them deep and slightly darker now in November than they were in August when she put them up. Hot and tired and triumphant. The kitchen at 90 degrees, and the canning pot boiling, and her hair pasted to her forehead, and the satisfaction of the lids pinging as they sealed one after another, ping, ping, ping. The small bright sound of food saved for winter. Green beans, 30-pint jars, slim and pale in the brine. Corn, 18-quart jars, kernels packed tight. The colour of the corn slightly muted by the canning, but still corn, still sweet, ready to come out in February when the world is grey and nothing is growing, and the corn will taste like the August it came from. Pickles, 12-quart jars of bread and butter pickles and 6-pint jars of dills. Beets, 18 pints, pickled. Carrots, 24 pints. Sauerkraut, 6-gallon crocks, fermenting still, because the kraut is alive in a way the canned things are not, and the kraut will be ready in another 2 weeks and will keep through the winter and into the spring. Then the fruit. Strawberry jam, 12 half-pint jars from June. Peach jam, 18 half-pints from August. Blackberry jam, 8 half-pints from the railroad cut. Apple butter, 14-pint jars, from October, when she and the children spent a whole Saturday at the range stirring it down with the long wooden spoon, the kitchen smelling of cinnamon and cloves and apples and the slow, patient heat of something becoming itself. Applesauce, 24-quart jars, from the Macintoshes. Pears, 12-quart jars, from the tree in the Hendersons' backyard, which Mrs. Henderson said she could have because the Hendersons could not eat them all themselves. And then the pickled things, the relishes, the chow-chow, the corn relish, the pepper relish from the green peppers that came in late. 12 more jars in various sizes, in various colours, the contents of late summer and early fall translated into glass. I want to stop and just let that be there for a moment. 200 and some jars, 200, each one of them packed by her hands, each one of them filled in a kitchen at 90 degrees with the canning pot boiling and the steam rising, and the small careful work of ladling the hot vegetables into the hot jars and sliding the rubber rings into place, and screwing on the zinc lids, and lifting the loaded jars into the boiling water bath with the long-handled tongs, and timing them to the second, and lifting them out at the right moment, and setting them on the kitchen towel on the counter and waiting for the pings, and listening for any jar that did not ping, and pulling that jar out and reprocessing it or eating it that week, because a jar that did not seal was a jar that would spoil. 200 jars, one woman, one summer, and not just her. Every woman on this block, every woman in this town, every woman in tens of thousands of towns. Multiplied out, the canning effort of American women in the war years was probably the largest single act of household food production in the country's history. The OPA actually encouraged it. The government printed pamphlets on home canning and distributed them through the county extension offices. The pressure canner became, briefly, a strategic appliance. The Ball brothers in Muncie, Indiana, who made the jars and the lids, ran their factories overtime, because every jar a housewife filled was a jar of food that did not need to come from the commercial supply chain, which freed the commercial supply chain to feed the army. It was a national project, run out of millions of kitchens, and nobody wrote it down properly. The histories of the war note in passing that there were victory gardens, that there was rationing, that women contributed. But the specificity of the work, the actual hot exhausting steam-soaked labour of putting up 200 jars of food in a single season, that does not show up in the histories, because the women who did it did not write about it. They were too tired to write about it. They were doing it. She stands in the basement and looks at the shelves. She does this sometimes, not for long, just for a minute. She looks at the rows of jars and she feels, for a moment, the small, clean satisfaction of having done this, of having made the winter possible, of having translated the green and growing summer into glass that will feed her family for 6 months. There is a kind of wealth in this that has nothing to do with money, and she knows it, and the knowing is its own form of pride, although she would not use that word because pride is a thing her mother taught her to be cautious of, and she has been cautious of it her whole life. But the feeling is there anyway, quiet and warm in the dim basement light. She takes down a quart jar of green beans for tonight's supper. She takes down a pint jar of corn relish to go with the bacon she will fry up for the boys' sandwich. She tucks them under her arm and she pulls the chain on the bulb, and the basement goes dark behind her, and she comes back up the stairs to the kitchen. The morning is gone now. It is nearly noon. The boy will be home in 20 minutes for lunch, and she has things to put together. She slices bread. She fries 2 strips of the bacon she bought this morning, the smell filling the kitchen, the small extravagance of fresh bacon, which they will not have again for at least a week. She crumbles half of it into the corn relish for a small lunch salad. She makes the boy a sandwich with the other half, mayonnaise on the bread, the bacon crisped and crumbled, a slice of the bread and butter pickle from the basement, the whole sandwich about as good a thing as a boy of 8 could ask for in November of 1943, and she wraps it in wax paper, although he will not need it to be wrapped because he will eat it at the table in 12 minutes flat. She makes herself a smaller version of the same sandwich. She pours 2 glasses of milk from the bottle. She hears the front door open. The boy. He comes into the kitchen with his cheeks red from the cold and his hair flat from his cap, and he says, "Hi, Mum," and he sits at the table and he eats his sandwich, and she sits across from him and eats hers, and she asks him about his morning, and he tells her about the spelling test and the math, and the boy who fell on the playground and skinned his knee. And she listens, because the listening is one of the things she gives him that no one else gives him exactly. And she has decided, the way she decides these things, that she will be very good at the listening, especially in this year, especially with his father gone, because the listening is what he will remember. He finishes his sandwich. He gulps his milk. He runs upstairs to use the bathroom and is back down in 2 minutes, his cap on, his coat on, his lunchbox from this morning empty in his hand. He kisses her on the cheek, which surprises her because he's not been kissing her on the cheek lately, that phase having ended a few months ago, and she takes the kiss without making a thing of it, and she says, "You have a good afternoon." And he says, "I will," and he is out the door, and the house is quiet again. She stands at the kitchen window and watches him walk down the front walk and turn the corner. He walks differently than he did a year ago. He walks like a small man. His shoulders are set. His hands are in his coat pockets. She watches him until he is out of sight, and then she turns back to the kitchen and she begins the dishes. By 1:15 the kitchen is clean, and the mending basket is back on the table, and the green beans for tonight are soaking in cold water with a small piece of bacon for flavour. By 1:25 she's putting on her coat again, picking up the small cloth bag of finished bandages from the closet under the stairs and walking the 2 houses down to the Hendersons. The Wednesday afternoon bandage rolling has been happening since the spring of 1942. It started with Mrs. Henderson, who had read in the Ladies' Home Journal that women's groups across the country were rolling bandages for the Red Cross, and she had called 4 of her neighbours and asked if they wanted to come over for an hour or 2 on Wednesday afternoons, and 4 of them had said yes, and the thing had begun, and it had not stopped. There are 5 of them now: Mrs. Henderson, who is 52 and whose only son is in the Army Air Corps; Mrs. Mitchell from across the street, who is 47 and has 2 sons in the Navy; Mrs. Peterson, who is 50 and whose son was killed in June; Mrs. Allison from down the block, who is 38 and whose husband is in North Africa; and her, 31, the youngest of them by enough years that she has thought about it sometimes, the way the others treat her with a small extra gentleness, the way they sometimes ask after the children with a particular attention, the way Mrs. Henderson, who has watched her grow up on this block since she moved in as a bride, has decided, without saying so, to look after her in small ways that she does not have to ask for. She lets herself in at the Hendersons' kitchen door, which is the door the women use when they come. The Hendersons' kitchen is bigger than her own, with a porcelain sink and a Hoosier cabinet against the wall, and a big enamelled table in the middle, and the table is set with 5 chairs and the bandage supplies are laid out, the rolls of gauze and the small wooden forms for rolling, and the empty boxes that will be filled by the end of the afternoon. Mrs. Henderson is at the range pouring tea into a brown pot. The others are already arriving. She hears Mrs. Mitchell coming up the back steps behind her. They take off their coats. They hang them on the hooks by the door. They sit down at the table, each in her usual chair, and the work begins and the talk begins, and the 2 are inseparable. The work and the talk, because the work is the reason for the talk, and the talk is what makes the work bearable. I want to tell you what they talk about, because I think it tells you something true about how community functioned in a wartime small-town American neighbourhood, in a way the official histories never quite capture. They talk about food first. They always start with food. What anybody has found at the grocery this week that is hard to find. Mrs. Mitchell got a tin of real butter last Friday, the first one she has seen since August, and she split it among them, a small chunk wrapped in wax paper for each, and she is still being thanked for it. They talk about the new substitution recipes the OPA has been publishing in the newspaper. The mock apple pie made with Ritz crackers, the eggless cake. The spam recipes, which are everywhere, because spam is everywhere. Because spam is one of the only meats that arrives by the truckload at the grocery, and is not rationed by point. They talk about whether you can really make a meatloaf with breadcrumbs and oatmeal and have it taste like anything, and Mrs. Allison says she has, and she has a recipe she will write out for everyone before the afternoon is over. They talk about the children. The Mitchell girl is starting to read finally after a slow start. The Henderson grandchildren came up from Cincinnati for the weekend, and the older one, who is 11, has decided he wants to enlist when he turns 18, and Mrs. Henderson has not slept properly for 3 nights because the 11-year-old does not understand what he has said. They talk about the letters. Everyone has had a letter this week except Mrs. Allison, whose last letter was 3 weeks ago, and they do not push her on this. But they pass the bowl of nuts toward her a little more often, and Mrs. Henderson refills her teacup before her own, the small choreography of care. They talk eventually about Mrs. Peterson's son. Not directly, never directly. But Mrs. Peterson mentions that she's been going through his school things finally, that she has decided it is time, that she found his 5th grade report card in a box in the attic and that he had gotten an A in spelling. And her voice catches just slightly on the word spelling, and the rest of them keep rolling bandages, their hands steady, and Mrs. Henderson reaches over without looking and pats Mrs. Peterson on the wrist once briefly, and the moment passes, and Mrs. Peterson breathes out, and the talk moves on gentle, like water moving around a stone. I want to ask you something, and I mean this genuinely. Have you ever sat in a room with women who knew how to do this? Who knew, without anyone teaching them in any formal way, how to hold each other in conversation, how to let grief surface, and then let it settle without making the person who was grieving have to do anything other than be there? It is a kind of communal skill, I think, and it does not get taught in schools, and it does not get written about much, and it is one of the things I find genuinely moving when I read accounts from this period. These women had been raised by women who had been raised by women, all the way back, in a tradition of female friendship that knew how to hold suffering without flinching from it and without staring at it, and they did it on Wednesday afternoons at Mrs. Henderson's kitchen table, while their hands rolled bandages that would, in some hospital somewhere, be wrapped around the wounds of someone's son. The afternoon goes by. The bandages accumulate in the boxes. Mrs. Henderson refills the teapot twice. At 3:15 the women stand, almost in unison, because the girls will be coming home from school in 15 minutes, and they need to be back in their own kitchens. They put on their coats. They thank Mrs. Henderson. Mrs. Henderson tells them which day next week, and they all know, but she says it anyway, because the saying is part of how the thing continues. They step out into the cold afternoon air, 4 of them, and they go in 4 different directions to 4 different houses, each of them carrying a small invisible weight that they did not have before they arrived, which is the small additional load of having been with each other, and which is also lighter than the weight they would be carrying alone, and the difference between the 2 weights is what the Wednesday afternoons are for. She walks home. The light has changed. The afternoon sun is low, the way it is in November, slanting across the yards at a steep angle, turning the bare branches gold. She lets herself into her own house. She takes off her coat. She goes into the kitchen. She puts the kettle on, although she has had enough tea for one afternoon. But the kettle is what she does when she comes home from somewhere, the way some people unlock a phone, the small unconscious gesture of return. The girl comes home at 3:30, walking with the older Peterson girl who waves at her from the sidewalk and continues on home, and her own girl runs up the front walk and bursts in through the door, talking about the day, about the project they did in art, about the boy who tripped on the way home and got mud on his pants, about the leaf she has brought back in her coat pocket, because it is the most beautiful leaf she has ever seen, a red maple leaf with a perfect star shape, and she shows it to her mother solemnly, and her mother admires it solemnly, and they put it in a book together to press it, because that is what you do with a perfect leaf in November of 1943. The boy comes home a few minutes later. He goes upstairs to change out of his school clothes. He comes back down in his play clothes and asks if he can go to the empty lot at the corner where the boys play, and she says yes, but to be home by 5, and he says he will, and he goes out the back door and the screen bangs behind him. The afternoon continues. She finishes the mending. She starts a pot of vegetable soup for tomorrow's lunch, using the bones from Sunday's chicken and the scraps from this week's vegetables and the small pot of leftover gravy she had been saving. She sets the green beans to simmer with the bacon. She begins the cornbread she will serve with the beans, mixing the cornmeal and the flour and the egg and the milk, the small precise measurements of a recipe she does not need to look at because she has made it 300 times. The girl sits at the kitchen table with her colouring book, and the radio plays low, the afternoon programme, and the kitchen warms and the smell of beans and bacon and cornbread fills the room. This is the part of the day she likes second best. The first best is the morning, the quiet hour before everyone wakes. The second best is the long late afternoon when the light is golden and the food is cooking and the children are in the house with her. The girl at the table colouring, the boy somewhere outside but coming home soon, the radio playing something slow, and her hands busy with the small, steady work of dinner. At 4:30 the boy comes back. He smells like outdoors. He goes upstairs to wash his hands. By 5 they are at the table. The beans, the bacon flavour steeped all through them. The cornbread, hot from the oven, with the smallest scrape of margarine on each piece. The corn relish from the basement. A small glass of milk for each of the children, water for her. They sit at the kitchen table, the 3 of them, with the empty chair at the head where their father would sit if he were home, and they eat, and they talk, and the girl tells the long story of her day, and the boy tells the shorter version of his, and she listens to both with the attention she gives the children at dinner, which is a particular kind of attention she does not give anyone else. After dinner, she washes the dishes with the girl drying. The boy goes to do his homework at the dining room table. The radio comes on for the evening news, 6:30, the small brown Philco on the kitchen counter, and she listens with one ear while she washes, and the news is about the Pacific and the names of the places, and she does not flinch, and the names go past, and the names do not include the one name that matters, and she lets out a small breath she did not realize she was holding. By 7, the kitchen is clean, the homework is done, and the family gathers in the parlour for the comedy programmes. Jack Benny tonight. They sit on the sofa, the boy on one side of her, the girl on the other, the girl curled against her with her head on her mother's lap, the boy sitting up straight the way an 8-year-old sits up straight when he is trying to be like his father. The console radio fills the room with Jack Benny's slow voice, and Mary Livingston's quick one, and Rochester's warm one, and the family laughs, the small, ordinary laughter of an American family on a Wednesday night in November of 1943. And the world outside the window is dark and cold, and the war is still on, but the war is not in this room, not for the half hour of Jack Benny, and the half hour is a kind of mercy, and she takes the mercy, and she does not feel guilty for taking it, because taking the mercy is part of how you keep going. At 7:30 the programme ends. By 8 the girl is in her nightgown and her teeth are brushed and she's in bed with a story being read to her. A chapter from a book about a girl on a farm in Wisconsin a long time ago. By 8:30 the boy's in his pyjamas and his teeth are brushed and his light is out, although he reads under the covers with a flashlight, and she pretends she does not know this. By 9 both children are asleep, the girl with her rabbit, the boy on his back with one arm flung over his head the way he has slept since he was a baby. She comes downstairs. The house is quiet again. The third quiet of the day, the deepest one, the one she has been moving towards since 4:20 this morning, the one that is hers alone, that no one will interrupt, that will last until she goes to bed. She goes into the parlour. She turns on the small table lamp by the armchair, the one with the cream-coloured shade and the pull chain. She sits down. She has a basket beside the chair with her knitting in it. A sweater she's making for the boy for Christmas. Navy blue wool, almost finished, the last sleeve to go. She picks up the knitting. She begins. The clock on the mantel ticks. The house creaks the way houses creak at night, the small settling sounds of wood adjusting to the cold. Outside, far off, a train whistles. The same train that whistled this morning, the night version of it, blowing west out of town toward Chicago. She knits for an hour. She does not turn on the radio. The radio is good for company during the day, but the evening is for the not having of company, the small, careful solitude that she has earned over the course of 14 hours of motion. The knitting goes slowly. The needles click. Her mind goes where it wants to go and she lets it. She thinks about him. She does not make a project of thinking about him, the way you might make a project of remembering someone you are afraid of forgetting. She does not have to. He is there, all the time, just under the surface, and the evening hour is when she lets him come up. She thinks about him not in dramatic ways. She thinks about him in the small ways. The way his hands looked when he was reading the newspaper in the chair across from her. The way he held his coffee cup with both hands wrapped around it, even when it was cool because he liked the feeling of holding something with both hands. The way he laughed, not loud, but with his whole face, his eyes squeezing shut, his shoulders shaking. The way he said her name, the way he came up behind her in the kitchen sometimes and put his arms around her waist while she was at the sink. And she would lean back into him for a moment, and the moment was the whole thing, the whole marriage, the whole reason for any of it. She knits. The needles click. The clock ticks. She does not cry. She has not cried properly in months. She does not know whether that is good or bad. She has decided not to think about it. At 10, she puts the knitting away. She turns off the lamp. She goes to the kitchen. She makes herself a cup of weak tea, the last cup of the day, in the brown ceramic pot with the chip on the spout. She carries it back to the parlour. She sits in the dark with it for a while, looking at the dim shapes of the room, the sofa, the chairs, the radio in the corner, the photographs on the mantel that she cannot quite see but that she knows are there. She finishes the tea. She washes the cup. She turns out the kitchen light. She climbs the stairs slowly because her feet ache, because they have been on a cold floor or a hard sidewalk for 16 hours, and the stairs at the end of the day feel longer than they did this morning. She goes into her room. She undresses by the small lamp on her side of the bed. She puts on her nightgown, the flannel one, because it is cold. She turns down the bed. She gets in. She lies for a moment on her back, looking at the ceiling, at the small pattern of the plaster, at the place where the light from the street lamp comes in around the edge of the curtain. She turns out the light. The bed is cold. She pulls the quilt up. She lies there, on her side, the way she's been sleeping since he left, taking up only half the bed even now, leaving the other half cold and unmade, as if she's still expecting him to come in late from somewhere and slide in beside her. She thinks about the letter in the drawer in the kitchen. He is well. He is thinking of her. He remembers the eggs. He remembers the kitchen. He will come home. She breathes out slowly into the dark room. The house is quiet. The children are sleeping. The day is done. Tomorrow is Thursday, the heavy cleaning day, and tomorrow she will get up at 4:20 and put the coffee on and stand at the sink in the dark before anyone else is awake, and she will do it again, the whole long day, because the whole long day is what she has, and the whole long day is what she's doing for him. Although he does not know it specifically, although he does not need to know it specifically, because love between two people across an ocean is made often of the things the other person does that they do not know about. The small daily continuances, the small kept promises, the small fires kept burning in small kitchens against the dark. She closes her eyes. The wind moves in the bare branches of the elm outside the window. She sleeps. I want to take you now into the longer arc of these years, because so far I've given you one day in detail, and a day is a precious unit, but the woman in the kitchen lived not one day but more than 2,000 of them, between the December morning when Pearl Harbor was attacked and the morning in August of 1945 when the second bomb dropped and the war ended. And then she lived more days after that, in a world that was no longer at war but that was not yet at peace in any way she recognized, and those days, the post-war days, are a story all their own, and I want to tell some of that too before we're done. But first I want to stay with the texture of the wartime years, because the years had a shape to them, and the shape is worth describing. The first year, 1942, was the year of figuring out. The rationing program rolled out in waves, sugar first in May, then coffee in November, then meat and butter and cheese and processed foods in March of 1943, when the full point system came into effect. Every new rationing announcement meant a new set of mental adjustments, new recipes to learn, new substitutions to practice, the eggless cake, the sugarless pie, the meat stretching tricks, the substitution of margarine for butter, of saccharin for sugar, of cornmeal for flour, of dried milk for fresh, of Spam for everything. The Ladies' Home Journal and Good Housekeeping and a dozen other women's magazines printed page after page of substitution recipes, and the OPA mailed out pamphlets, and the women learned, the way women had been learning for centuries, by trying and failing and trying again, and asking each other and writing down what worked. I want to be honest, some of the substitutions were not good. The mock apple pie was a kind of joke, although a tender one, and women made it because they had to, but they did not pretend it was a real apple pie. The eggless cake was edible but slightly flat. The saccharin in the coffee was bitter and never quite right. The margarine, even after you mixed in the yellow colouring, was not butter, and everyone knew it was not butter, and everyone ate it anyway, and after a while you forgot what butter tasted like, and then the war ended and you had butter again and you remembered. The Victory Garden was the other great project of 1942. The OPA called for Americans to plant gardens to supplement the food supply, and Americans responded on a scale that surprised even the OPA. By the end of 1943, there were 20 million Victory Gardens in the United States, producing somewhere around 40% of the country's vegetable supply. 40%. From backyards and vacant lots, and the strips of grass between sidewalks and streets. From window boxes in apartments and rooftop plots in cities. From land that had never been a garden before and would not be a garden again, broken up by housewives and grandmothers and children and old men with no other contribution to make, and planted with whatever seed they could get, and watered and weeded and harvested through the spring and summer and fall, year after year. She herself had not had a garden before the war. Their lot was small. The previous owners had laid grass and put in a few shrubs and called it done. She had not thought of herself as a gardener. She had grown up on a farm in Iowa, of course, and she knew about gardens. But knowing about gardens and being a gardener are two different things, and she had been content to buy her vegetables at Kruger's before the war and let the backyard be a backyard. In the spring of 1942, she had turned the backyard into a garden. She and the boy. He was 6 then, going on 7, and she'd given him a small spade and shown him how to break up the sod, and they had worked for 2 weekends straight, lifting the grass and turning the dirt under and pulling out the rocks and adding the bag of dried cow manure she'd bought at the feed store on the edge of town. The boy had taken to it the way some children take to particular kinds of work, with a serious, focused attention that was almost like his father's. And when his father had come home from the recruiting office that summer with the news, and when his father had shipped out a few months later, the garden had become something for the boy as much as for her. He had inherited the garden, in a sense. He had become its second gardener. He weeded it without being asked. He watered it in dry stretches. He brought the first tomato of every summer into the kitchen with the particular look of a small man who has done something useful. And she had taken the tomato from him with the kind of seriousness it deserved, because the seriousness was what he needed from her in that moment. The garden gave them tomatoes and beans and cucumbers and lettuce and radishes and carrots and onions and peppers and cabbages, and the small experimental things she tried each year that did and did not work. The eggplant did not work the first year. The pumpkins worked the second year. The asparagus she planted in 1943 would not produce a real crop until 1945, but she planted it anyway, the way you plant asparagus, on faith, with the long view, knowing that the harvest is years out, knowing that the act of planting is itself a kind of statement about the future, a small declaration that there will be a future and you are willing to wait for it. I want to sit with that for a moment, because I think it is one of the things about the Victory Garden that does not get talked about enough. To plant asparagus in the spring of 1943 was an act of hope. You were planting something that would not feed you for 2 years. You were planting something that required you to believe that in 1945 you would still be here, in this house, with this family, and that you would want asparagus that spring. You were planting against the news. You were planting against the long lists of casualties in the paper. You were planting against the gold stars on the houses up the block. You were saying, with your hands in the dirt, that the future was a thing that you could still imagine, even when imagining it was hard. The asparagus did come up in 1945. The first spears came up in April. She harvested them in May. She steamed them with a small piece of margarine and a pinch of salt, and she ate them at the kitchen table with the children, and they were good, and she did not cry. But she thought about the spring she had planted them, and about the woman she had been then, and about how that woman had not known whether the war would end, and the woman she was now did know, and the knowing was a thing she had earned in a way she had not expected to have to earn anything. The canning followed the gardening, of course. Late summer and early fall were the canning season, the hot stretch from late July through October, when the kitchen ran at 95 degrees for days at a time, and she put up everything the garden produced and everything else she could buy or trade or gather. The canning was the harder physical work of the year. The pressure canner she had bought in 1942 from the Sears catalogue weighed 20 pounds empty and 40 pounds full of jars and water and steam, and she lifted it on and off the gas range with the long-handled tongs, and the back of her shoulders ached for 3 days after each canning session. The jars themselves, by the end of August, would have lined the back wall of the basement and started to creep into the side wall, and by the end of October the basement looked like a small dim shop, and she would stand at the bottom of the stairs sometimes and look at the shelves and feel that she had made something that mattered, in a small but real way, in the world. The scrap drives were the other great wartime project. I want to tell you about the fat collection because I have already mentioned it, but the detail is worth dwelling on. Once a month, the OPA asked housewives to bring their saved fat to the butcher, who would weigh it and pay you 4 cents a pound for it. You saved the fat all month in a tin can by the range. Bacon grease, beef drippings, the skim from the top of a stock pot, the trimmings from a roast, everything that would have been thrown away, kept. And when the can was full, you took it down to Kruger's, and Mr. Kruger would weigh it on the small brass scale and pay you in pennies, and the pennies went into your change purse, and the fat went into the next stage of the supply chain, which ended in factories that turned it into glycerin, which ended in factories that turned it into munitions, which ended in the hands of soldiers, somewhere the hands of her own husband possibly, with the small chemical possibility that the fat she had saved from her kitchen was, at some unknowable later moment, helping to keep him alive. The OPA pamphlets put it just that plainly. 1 pound of waste fat, they said, contains enough glycerin to make 1 pound of black powder, which is enough for 6 75mm shells. The math was made specific, on purpose, to give the housewife the sense that her 1 tin of saved bacon grease was a meaningful contribution, and maybe it was. The records suggest that American housewives collected hundreds of millions of pounds of waste fat over the course of the war, and that the fat was in fact an important component in the explosives industry. The pamphlet was not lying. I do not know how to feel about this exactly. There is a part of me that finds something almost dark in it, the small domestic acts being put in service of explosives, the tin can on the stove being part of a kill chain. And there is another part of me that finds something quietly beautiful, the way ordinary women understood themselves to be part of something larger than their own kitchens, the way the saving of fat became a kind of communion with the husbands and sons overseas, the small repeated act of saying, I am with you, even from here, in this yellow kitchen, in this small town, in the dim morning before anyone else is up. There were the tin drives too, the collection of tin cans washed and flattened, taken down to the schoolyard once a month and added to the great pile that the trucks came and hauled away. The rubber drives, the donation of old tyres and rubber boots, and the rubber bands you had saved in a drawer. The paper drives, the bundling of old newspapers and magazines and tying them with string, and leaving them on the curb for the Boy Scouts to collect. The book drives, when they collected old books for soldiers overseas, and she had gone through her bookshelves and chosen carefully which ones to give, and she had given a worn copy of Tom Sawyer that had been her brother's when he was a boy, and that she had taken with her when she left home, and she had given it because the giving felt like the right thing, and she had thought about Tom Sawyer being read by a soldier in a foxhole somewhere, and the thought had pleased her in a quiet way. I want to tell you about the war bond drives too, because they were part of the texture of these years. Every few months there was a war bond drive, and the OPA and the Treasury Department and the celebrities of the era would all line up to push the sale of war bonds. The bonds came in denominations from $25 up. You bought them at the post office. You could buy them on payroll deduction at the factories. You bought them, your government told you, because they helped fund the war, and because they kept inflation down by taking money out of circulation, and because they were a small individual act of patriotism that you could perform in addition to the small daily acts of saving fat and planting gardens and rolling bandages. She bought a $25 bond every month. She had been doing it since January of 1942. She bought them at the post office on the first Friday of each month, and the grey-haired clerk would write up the bond and give her the receipt, and she would put the receipt in a folder in the small writing desk in the dining room, and the bond itself would arrive in the mail a few weeks later, and she would file it in the same folder. By the end of the war, she'd bought 47 bonds, $1,175, real money, in 1945. The bonds were a kind of slow savings, a small assurance against the future, a way of saying with her $3.50 a month, which was a stretch in the budget, that she was investing in the end of the war, that she was helping pay for the end of the war, that she had skin in the game. There were the other things too, the smaller things, the texture of the years, the blackout drills when the city would turn off all its lights on a given night, and you would draw your blackout curtains and the family would sit in the parlour with a single candle and listen to the radio at low volume, and the block warden would walk up the street with his flashlight checking that no one was showing light, and you would feel, for the half hour of the drill, that the war was very close, although the war was not very close, and you would feel a little foolish afterwards for having taken it so seriously. And yet the drills continued, and you continued to take them seriously, because the seriousness was part of how you participated. The block wardens themselves were one of the things about this era that I find quietly fascinating. They were ordinary men, too old for the draft or with deferments, who had been appointed by the city to be responsible for one block of houses. They checked the blackouts. They knew where the air raid shelters were, although there were no air raids and never would be, in their town. They knew which families had small children and which had elderly residents in case of emergency. They were a kind of civilian organisational infrastructure, set up in the early months of the war on the theory that the country needed to be ready for anything, and the country had decided that ready meant a network of ordinary men with armbands knowing which families were on their block. Their block warden was Mr. Thompson, a retired railroad clerk who lived 4 doors down. He was a kind, quiet man, 67 years old, who took his armband off only when he was sleeping. He came to the bandage rolling once or twice a year and brought his wife with him. He died in 1946 of a heart attack while shoveling snow. The Red Cross volunteering was the other dimension of community service, beyond the bandage rolling. She worked 1 shift a week at the Red Cross canteen at the train station, where she and 3 other women served coffee and sandwiches to the soldiers passing through on their way to the base or back from leave. The shifts were 3 hours long on Saturday afternoons, and the boy and girl came with her sometimes, and the girl had been mildly in love with every 19-year-old soldier she met for 2 solid years, and the soldiers had been kind to her, charmed by her, and she would later say, when she was grown, that the canteen had been one of her clearest early memories. The smell of coffee and the men in uniform and her mother in her white volunteer apron, and the feeling, even at 6 and 7 years old, of being part of something that mattered. I want to slow down now, because we are coming up on the part of the years that is harder to tell. In May of 1944, the letter came that was not from him. The letter was from his commanding officer. It came on a Tuesday afternoon. She was hanging laundry in the backyard when the mailman walked up the front walk and rang the bell, which the mailman did not normally do, and she dropped the wet sheet she was hanging and walked around the house to the front, drying her hands on her apron, and she saw the mailman standing on the porch with an envelope, and she knew before he handed it to her, the way women knew, the way the women on her block had been quietly teaching each other how to know, by the weight of an envelope, by the look on the mailman's face, by the time of day. The letter said that he had been wounded. Not killed. Wounded. Seriously, the letter said, but stable. He had been hit by shrapnel during an action near a place she could not pronounce, and he had been evacuated to a hospital ship, and he was expected to live, although his right leg below the knee had been amputated, and he would be returned to the United States as soon as he was strong enough to travel. She sat on the porch for a long time after she read the letter. The mailman had gone. The wet sheet was still hanging half-pinned on the line in the backyard. The children would be home from school in an hour. She sat on the porch step with the letter in her hand and the late afternoon sun on her face, and she felt for the first time in 2.5 years a feeling she could not name. Not relief, exactly. Not grief, although there was something grief-shaped in it. Something more like the sensation of stepping off a moving train, the small dizzy stopped feeling of arriving somewhere after a long journey, although she had not known until that moment that the journey had been going on. He was alive. He was coming home. He was, however, not coming home the same. She did not tell the children that day. She decided that she would tell them when she had a plan, when she had information about when he would actually arrive, when she could give them the news in a shape they could hold. She walked the letter down to Mrs. Henderson's house at 5 that afternoon, after she had taken the laundry in, after she'd started supper, after she had composed her face. Mrs. Henderson opened the door and she handed Mrs. Henderson the letter, and Mrs. Henderson read it, and Mrs. Henderson put her arms around her, and she stood in Mrs. Henderson's kitchen for a long time and did not cry, although Mrs. Henderson cried for her a little, the way Mrs. Henderson sometimes did the crying that other women could not do for themselves. He came home in August, by Pullman train from San Francisco 3 days across the country, met at the station by her and the children, who had been told 2 weeks earlier and who had absorbed the news in the careful, surprising ways that children absorb news, the boy quiet, the girl asking questions, the two of them then settling into a kind of waiting that was different from the previous waiting, more specific, more anchored. She had been to the station to meet trains before, during his leaves, before he shipped out, and she had a memory of him stepping off the train in his white navy uniform, tall and laughing, scooping the children up. The man who stepped off the train in August of 1944 was not that man. He was thinner. He was using crutches. His face had a tightness around the eyes that had not been there before. He saw her, and he smiled the way he had always smiled, his whole face, his eyes squeezing shut, his shoulders shaking, and he came toward her on the crutches, awkward, careful, and he reached her and he dropped one crutch and put his arm around her and held her, and she held him, and the children stood beside them and waited, the way children wait when adults are doing something important. And after a long minute he let her go and he turned to the children and he said hello. And the boy said Dad, just that one word, and the girl said Dad, and the four of them stood on the platform in the August afternoon, the red cap with his bags, the train hissing behind them, the small town station with its wooden benches and its single ticket window, and they were, somehow against everything, together again. I want to tell you about the months that followed, because the months that followed were harder than the months of the war in some ways, and easier in others, and I think the texture of them tells you something important about what these women, what this family, what this whole generation was actually doing in those years. He was different. There were the obvious differences, the leg, the crutches, then later the prosthetic which the VA hospital fitted him with in October, and which took months to learn to use properly. The phantom pain that came up some nights, that made him wake gasping, that made him sit in the dark in the parlour at 3 a.m. sometimes, with his hand pressed against the place where his leg ended, the leg that was not there. She would come down sometimes and sit with him. She would not say anything. She would put her hand on his shoulder and sit with him and watch the dark until he was ready to come back upstairs, and then they would go back to bed, and he would sleep, and she would lie awake and listen to him breathing. There were the less obvious differences. He was quieter than he had been. He had been a man who talked easily, who told stories, who was the centre of a room. He did not do those things now, or he did them only sometimes, and only with effort. He flinched at sudden noises, cars backfiring on the street, a dish dropped in the kitchen. He would close his eyes for a second and breathe in through his nose and breathe out through his mouth, the small, careful breath he had learned in the hospital, and then he would open his eyes and continue with whatever he'd been doing, and he would not mention it, and she would not mention it. But she would notice every time, and she would adjust the household around the noticing. He went back to work in February of 1945 at the small accounting firm where he had worked before the war. They had held his job for him, the way employers did during the war by federal mandate. He sat at a desk again and added up columns of numbers and prepared tax returns and corporate filings, and his colleagues were kind to him, and his customers were kind to him, and the kindness was sometimes the hardest thing about being back, because the kindness was a constant small reminder that he was the man who needed kindness now, and he had not been that man before. She watched him relearn the house, the way you relearn a house when you have been away. He would forget for a moment where she kept the coffee. He would reach for the wrong drawer. He would sit in the parlour in the evening and look around the room as if checking that everything was still in its place, and everything was still in its place because she had kept everything in its place. And the keeping had been one of the small things she had been doing for him, without quite saying so, a kind of preserved museum of their life that he could come home to and find unchanged in any of the small ways, although the people inside it were forever changed in all the large ways. The war ended in August of 1945, first in Europe in May, although the Japanese War continued, then in the Pacific in August. The 2 atomic bombs and the surrender, and the small bewildered relief in their parlour when the announcement came on the radio and they sat together on the sofa, the 4 of them. And she held his hand and the boy said, "Is it over, Dad?" And he said yes. And the girl said, "Does that mean you have to go away again?" And he said no. And the girl said good, and the 4 of them sat there, and the world had ended. The war world had ended, and a new world was beginning, although none of them knew what the new world would look like yet. There is a thing I want to say about the post-war years, because I have been thinking about how to say it, and I think it deserves to be said directly. The women who had run the home fronts of America for 4 years were asked, in the years after the war, to step back. The factories that had hired them for the duration were now being given back to the men returning from overseas. The newspapers and magazines that had celebrated their contributions during the war began publishing articles about the importance of returning to the home, of making the home a refuge for the returning soldier, of focusing on family. The OPA wound down. The ration books were collected and stored. The victory gardens were dug up and put back to grass. The bandage rolling stopped gradually, in living rooms across the country. The Red Cross canteen at the train station closed in 1946. Some of this was natural. The war was over. The mobilization was no longer needed. Many of the women who had worked in the factories had done so out of necessity and were happy to return to the domestic work they had always done. Many had not. Many had found, in the work of those 4 years, a sense of competence and contribution that they were not ready to give up, and the asking of them to give it up was, for those women, the first real conflict of the post-war period, although it was rarely described as a conflict in the official accounts of the era. She herself had not worked in a factory. She had run her household, she had volunteered, she had managed. The end of the war did not change her work in the obvious ways it changed the work of women who had been hired for the duration. Her work continued. She did not lose a job. She did not get sent home. But there was, I think, a quieter version of the same shift for women like her. The 4 years of intense purposeful domestic mobilization came to an end. The garden was no longer a victory garden. It was just a garden. And the planting of it was no longer an act of national service. It was just a thing she did. The canning was no longer feeding the country. It was just feeding her family. The careful counting of ration points was over, because there were no more ration points, and the careful planning of meals was now just regular planning. The Wednesday afternoon bandage rolling stopped in October of 1945. The women on her block continued to see each other, of course, but they saw each other for tea now, not for war work, and the difference was real, although none of them would have used the word for it. The word being maybe purpose, or maybe shared purpose, or maybe the simple feeling of doing something hard together that mattered to people far away. I do not want to overstate this. The women I am describing did not on the whole feel sorry for the end of the war. They were profoundly grateful that the war was over. The gold stars on the houses up the block had been a kind of running grief for years, and the end of the war meant that no new gold stars would appear, and that was a relief beyond measuring. The relief was real. The relief was the main thing. But underneath the relief for some of them was a smaller, more complicated thing, which was the loss of the structure that had given the years a shape, the thing they had been part of, the thing they had been good at, the thing they had been doing together, with each other and with millions of women they would never meet for almost half a decade. She felt this, not always, not obviously, but sometimes, in the small quiet hour of the morning that had been hers throughout the war, the hour at 4:20 in the kitchen with the coffee on, she would stand at the sink with her hands flat on the counter and look out at the dark yard and feel, for a moment, that something had ended that she did not have a name for. And then she would shake it off, and she would pour her coffee, and she would begin the day, and the day would be the day, and the day was a good day, almost always because he was home, and the children were well, and the house was warm, and the war was over, and everything she had been wanting for 4 years she now had. And the having was the main thing, and the small quiet feeling underneath was a thing she was not entitled to, she decided, and she let it go, and she made breakfast, and life continued. What I want to say finally about these women is something that I have been trying to find the words for, and I am not sure I have them, but I will try. They were not heroic in the way the men were heroic. The men went away and fought and died and came home, some of them, and the country recognised them properly in the years after, with parades and pensions and the GI Bill, and the recognition was deserved. The women were not given parades. The women went on doing what they had been doing, in their kitchens, in their small houses, on their quiet streets year after year, and the country did not give them parades because the country did not quite know what to do with what they had done. What they had done was hold the country together at the level of the household. They had fed it, they had clothed it, they had preserved it, they had raised the children, they had managed the small, precious resources of millions of small, precious households, and they had done it in a way that allowed the country to fight a war on 2 fronts for 4 years, without ever experiencing, on the home front, the level of deprivation that ravaged Europe in the same years. The American kitchens did not run out of food. The American children did not go to bed hungry in any large numbers. The American households continued to function, in every state of the Union, in every small town like this one, and the functioning was the work of women like the woman at the sink multiplied out, and the multiplication is what made the country what it was during those years. I keep coming back to one image, and I want to leave you with it now before we move toward the closing of the night. The image is of her on a Wednesday morning in November of 1943, walking back from Kruger's with the basket on her arm. The basket is not heavy. The basket contains a week of meals. The light is pale and cold. The trees on the street are bare. She's 31 years old. Her husband is in the Pacific somewhere. Her children are at school. The day is in front of her, full of small, careful tasks, and she's walking home to begin them. That image is the one I want you to hold as the night gets late and the world outside your window gets quiet. The woman with the basket with the week of meals, the walking in the cold, pale sunshine, with the small competence in her chest of having done it well, and the long day still ahead, and the long years still ahead, and the small, steady faithfulness of getting up tomorrow and doing it all again. She did. She got up tomorrow. She did it all again. She did it for the duration of the war. She did it for the years after. She did it, in her quiet, faithful way, for the rest of her life, although the doing changed shape, the way the doing always changes shape. As the children grew up and the husband recovered, and the world moved on into its post-war prosperity, and its suburbs, and its station wagons, and its electric appliances, and its frozen foods, and its eventual forgetting of what the war years had actually felt like day to day in kitchens like hers. She did not forget. She never forgot. She did not talk about it much, the way her generation did not talk about much, but she remembered, in her body, in her hands, in the small habits she kept for the rest of her life. She would never throw out bacon grease. She would never use more sugar than a recipe asked for. She would keep canning every August and September, long after canning had become an unnecessary thing, because the canning was part of her, and the part of her that had been forged in those years could not unmake itself, and did not want to. When she died, many years later, in the late 1980s, her daughter found in the bottom drawer of the kitchen, where her mother had kept it for over 40 years, a small bundle of papers tied with brown string. The papers were the V-mail letters her father had written from the Pacific. There were 37 of them. They were folded carefully and arranged in date order. They had been read and read and read. The paper soft from the handling, the ink slightly faded. Her daughter sat at the kitchen table, which was a different kitchen table than the one in this story, in a different kitchen, in a different town, in a different world, and she read the letters one by one. She read about the Pacific and the heat and the routine of the days and the small comforts the soldiers had managed for each other. She read about how her father missed her mother, and about the eggs he remembered, and about the kitchen with the light coming in over the sink. She read until the letters were done, and then she sat at the table for a long time with the bundle in her hands, and she thought about her parents, both of them gone now, and about the years she had been too young to understand, and about the long, faithful life of small, ordinary acts that had held her family together when everything had wanted to break it apart. I want to tell you what these women understood, and what we have half forgotten. They understood that a household is a small economy, and that small economies, faithfully maintained, can survive almost anything. They understood that constraint is not the same as deprivation, that a smaller life made with care can be a fuller life than a larger life made carelessly, that the work of the hands has its own dignity, that the keeping of a fire is the keeping of a family, that the canning of a tomato in August is a letter to your future self in February, that the planting of asparagus is an act of faith, that the rolling of a bandage on a Wednesday afternoon is a way of loving someone you do not know who is bleeding somewhere you cannot see, that the management of a single household across the years of a war is not a small thing, although it looks like a small thing, although it is composed almost entirely of small things, because the small things, multiplied across the days and weeks and months and years, become the largest thing there is, which is a life, and the lives of millions of women like this one, faithfully kept, became, in the aggregate, the home front, which is what we now call, almost in passing, when we talk about those years, the place where the war was won quietly by women in kitchens. I want to ask you something before we close. Did your grandmother or great-grandmother live through the 1940s home front? Is there something she made, or something she said, or something she did that you still carry with you, although you may not have known you were carrying it? I would genuinely love to hear it in the comments. The recipes that came down through your family, the small habits that you cannot explain except that someone in your line taught them to you, the things in the back of your kitchen drawer that have been there longer than you have been alive. I think those things are part of the inheritance, and the inheritance is one of the things that makes us who we are, even when we cannot quite name what's happening when we use our grandmother's measuring spoon, or fold a dish towel a particular way, or refuse to throw out the small last bit of something because something inside us, older than us, will not allow it. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to see more videos like this, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel. It really helps us keep making more content. See you in the next one. We are coming back now to the kitchen. It is morning again, a different morning, several years on, the exact date does not matter. It is a quiet weekday in the late 1940s, after the war, before the world had quite remade itself into what it would become. She's in the kitchen. The coffee's on. The light at the window over the sink is just beginning to change, the grey loosening at its edges. She's 40 years old now. Her hair is starting to show a few small threads of silver at the temples. Her hands are the same hands. The kitchen is the same kitchen. The gas range is the same range, although the burners have been replaced once, and the pilot light has been adjusted. One of the knobs is loose and she keeps meaning to ask him to look at it. He's upstairs sleeping. He sleeps in now, on weekdays, because his work at the firm starts at 9, and he does not need to be up at 4. The boy is grown and gone, almost, off to college on the GI Bill that has been extended in various ways. The boy now 17, and home for the holiday weekend and asleep in his old bedroom upstairs. The girl is 15, in her room, asleep with her rabbit, which she still has, although the rabbit is in retirement now on a shelf above the bed, and not in the bed itself. The house is quiet in the way it has always been quiet at this hour. She pours her coffee. She stands at the window with the cup in her hands. The garden is sleeping under its November frost. The asparagus bed at the back is dormant. The kitchen smells of coffee and faintly still of the things she has cooked over the past 30 years in this room. The dish towel is folded over the oven handle, white with a thin blue border, embroidered along one edge with stitches she has now done herself for many years, the original ones having worn through and been replaced, although the pattern is the same, because she copied her mother-in-law's pattern when she replaced them. She stands at the window. She watches the light come up. The radio sits on the counter. She does not turn it on. She has not turned it on at this hour for years. The hour before everyone else is up is hers, and she has decided, the way she has decided everything in her life, that she will keep it. On the counter near the bread box there is a row of jars catching the light. Small ones, the kind she uses for the things she's using up. There is a jar of bacon grease in one. There is a jar of the small good drippings from yesterday's roast in another. There is an almost empty jar of the apple butter she put up in October, the last of last fall's batch, which she will finish on her toast this morning. The jars catch the light coming in from the window, the pale cold light of a November morning, and they hold it and they shine. She finishes her coffee, she rinses the cup, she sets it in the rack to dry. On the counter beside the bread box there is a folded letter. It is not a wartime letter. It is a letter from her mother in Iowa, who is older now, who writes every week, and whose letters arrive each Wednesday and sit on the counter through the next day before she answers them. The letter is from this Monday. She read it yesterday. She will answer it today. She picks it up. She holds it for a moment. The paper is warmer than the V-mail had been, heavier, more substantial. The handwriting is her mother's, slightly shakier than it used to be, still strong, still careful. The letter is about ordinary things. The weather, the neighbours, the recipes her mother has been trying,